Hello and welcome to the Hoop Collective podcast. We talk about the NBA. We're doing it on Sunday evening. Joining me from Washington, D.C., where he's on a road trip with the Brooklyn Nets, is Nick Friedell. Hello, Nick.
Hey, it's good to hear your voice, my man. How you doing?
I'm doing good, although got bad news today, Nick. Paul Silas passed away, 79 years old. Paul Silas was a mentor to me, and you don't normally, as a reporter, you're not supposed to have relationships like this with people that you cover. And all I can say is I was 25 years old in 2003, and back then, Nick, people that age didn't cover the NBA. Now there's a lot more younger folks covering the NBA today. Some of the best analysis and writing and stuff comes from people in their 20s. That wasn't the case back then. Back then, you couldn't get on the NBA in your 20s. It took something special. Not that I'm saying I was special. I just fell into it. And he was the first coach I covered. And I remember the second preseason game. It was in Asheville, North Carolina. Only time I'd ever been to Asheville, North Carolina. He was hired just that year to coach the Cavs and LeBron James. He had been a head coach with the Charlotte and then New Orleans Hornets before. Won I think 3 championships, a couple with the Celtics and one with the Sonics, and was had a long career as an assistant coach. And big burly man, in today's day and age, he's built kind of like PJ Tucker, but not that muscular, but maybe a little taller than PJ, but that kind of a brawler, power forward. And I remember in Asheville, Rick Bonnell, who was the former beat writer. Rick passed away, unfortunately, last year. He came up and gave Paul a hug. He had covered Paul for years, the Charlotte Hornets, before they moved to New Orleans. And Nick, I remember looking at like, what the heck is going on? A reporter comes up and hugs a coach. I was like, what is going on? Well, I get it. He was like no coach I ever covered. He taught me so much about how the NBA game works, which, he was in his mid 60s at the time. I was in my, early to mid 20s. I didn't know anything, Nick. I didn't know anything. I was barely getting by day to day. He could have looked at me, and a lot of people did, quite frankly. I don't even blame him. But he could have looked at me as like this know-nothing pest who, wasn't worth the time of day. And that wasn't the way he treated me at all. And the second week of the season. Have I ever told you the Ira Newble story, Nick?
No.
Second week of the season, maybe the third week of the season, very early in the season, the Cavs are struggling. LeBron's rookie year, they were not good. They started like, off the top of my head, I want to say they started like 4-15, something like that. Oof. And they were struggling. They were maybe 2-6. And they played a game in Atlanta. And the Cavs had signed this guy, this role player, Ira Newble, who had previously played for the Hawks, and I think lived in Atlanta, and he was making his return. And he either didn't play him or played him almost no minutes. And after the game, Ira Newble, who, by the way, I later came to like really appreciate, really thoughtful guy, but this was not in his wheelhouse. Picture this, Nick. It's post game. The Cavs have just lost. They've gone to like 2-7. We're standing in the hallway outside the locker room, waiting to get into the locker room. Paul Silas comes out in the hallway, gives us his post game comments. He's not happy. He goes back into his office. We're waiting to get into the locker room. All of a sudden, Ira Newble comes out of Paul Silas's office door, shirt half on, bag in his hand, like on the run. Silas comes running out of the door on his heels. And I'm just standing there. And Ira's on one side of me and Paul's on the other. And Ira looks back and goes, I don't care what you say. I don't care about you. And Paul goes, get back here, you hip hop effer. Like, I was stunned. Like, Nick, this is my third week on the job, you know? And, the thing is that Paul was looking for a fight. He was looking for a fight because he wanted to get the team right. He kicked players off the bench. He told players to stay home from road trips. He coached a very different style. He was not maybe the greatest coach of all time, but what he did? He had LeBron's back. It's hard to imagine LeBron on a team where LeBron was sort of picked on. It's kind of a funny concept. The veterans on the team picked on him, even though that team was bad. They picked on him, and Paul had LeBron's back, especially during that first season. And he told us so many stories. He told us of his recovering from being he was an alcoholic, and he told us about how when he played in the NBA, that at the was standard. Every player got 2 beers, put 2 ice cold beers, put in their locker at every game. And some guys drank them right there in the locker room, and some guys didn't drink them at all. Some guys maybe took them with them, but he would go around. He would get a bag at every game, and he would go pick up the ones that the guys left, and he would basically drink like that after every single game. And he drank like that for years. And he told me that he was an assistant coach with the Knicks, and I think he lived in Westchester County. That's where his home was. And he was dry. He had gotten drinks after a game in the garden, and he got lost somewhere in the city, and he couldn't figure his way out. He was so scared for some reason, although he would never have been scared. Nick, did you ever meet Paul?
In the early days, I believe we crossed paths, but it wasn't more than a hello.
His whole face was all around his eyes, his eyebrows, and his side of his eyes. He had scars where he had stitches because he played in a different era where they beat the heck out of each other.
Yeah.
And he was afraid. He said to himself, if he could find a way out of there and get home, he would quit drinking. And I'm sure there was more to the story to that, but he did. He quit drinking. And he used to hang out with Red Auerbach. When he was playing for the Celtics, like he would go hang out in Red Auerbach's office and just talk strategy with him, and he would tell me Auerbach stories. And so a few years ago, I don't know if you remember this, but ESPN did this big long, like multi-part documentary on the history of basketball.
Jackie was involved with it.
Yeah, Jackie wrote the corresponding book.
Yeah.
I'm failing to remember what it was, but anyway,
Basketball love story. And for that, I went to Paul's house in Charlotte and interviewed him for hours. The people that he was cross paths with and associated with. He was a champion Celtic in the 70s. He played for Lenny Wilkins won the title as a player coach with the Sonics. He was on that team, like sort of as the player assistant coach. And he was a GOAT. He called a timeout the Celtics didn't have in one of the great games in NBA history, the 4 overtime finals game between the Suns and the Celtics. He played for the Suns too. Anyway, I've gone on too long. He's so many things he would say that I always stick with me. And one of the things that LeBron, maybe he hasn't said in recent years, but he said it for a decade. Paul used to say, nothing in the NBA is a bed of roses. No matter what you have, occasionally you're going to have problems. And, it sounds like a pretty simple saying, but it's true in the NBA. You've won 8 games in a row. Not if there's going to be a bed of roses, whatever. So he used to brag, Nick, about he would
badger players to get married to the mothers of their children. I don't know if you could get away with it in today's day and age, but he had like a count of how many marriages he basically badgered the guys into getting married. He was very proud of that, and his wife Carolyn, she is remarkable, and he used to always say, "Happy wife, happy life." Said that all the time. So anyway, I learned so much from him. LeBron spoke very eloquently after the Lakers won in Detroit tonight, and LeBron spoke very eloquently about Paul Silas. They didn't, he only coached a season and a half. He got fired his second season. It wasn't a long stint, but it was very, very meaningful to me. He came from an era, Nick, where he would be physical with players. He was strong. He'd grab them and he would throw them up against the wall. He would throw them into a locker, and like I would know about it and I wouldn't report it. It was a completely different era. Now, my God, I'd be on First Take the next day talking about how the coach of a team threw a guy in a locker. Anyway, rest in peace to Paul Silas. Obviously his son Steven is the head coach of the Rockets, and he was very proud of him. So it's time to knock that new business idea out of the park with Shopify, the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. Forget the off-season work. Shopify makes it simple to sell to anyone from anywhere. Whether you're selling warm-ups or wall hangers, it's time to start selling with Shopify and join the platform simplifying commerce for millions of businesses worldwide. With Shopify, you'll customize your online store to your brand. Discover new customers and build the relationships that create those die-hard fans. Shopify fields all the sales channels to grow a winning business. From an in-person POS system to an all-in-one e-commerce platform, even across social media platforms like TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. And thanks to 24/7 support and free on-demand business courses, Shopify is on your team every step of the way. It's how every minute new sellers around the world score their first sale with Shopify, and you can too. Shopify is the secret to becoming a business champion by making it simple for anyone to sell their products anywhere, taking the guesswork out of selling. When you're ready to take your winning idea to the world, team up with Shopify, the commerce platform powering millions of businesses down the street and around the globe. Try out Shopify for free today and start selling anywhere. It's the best time of the year. Football season is in full swing. Basketball and hockey have returned, and nothing beats seeing your favorite team live. Make up for lost time. Go enjoy a game. Vivid Seats, the official ticketing partner of ESPN, is offering you $10 off your first $100 ticket purchase with code HOOP. That's code HOOP, HOOP. Download the app or visit vividseats.com today. Vivid Seats, life happens live.
Now it's time for Hoop Collective Trivia.
Okay. We missed you, Paul. So, Nick, the team that you've had, I'm not so sure you're going to think this fondly of this team in 20 years, like I'm talking about Paul Silas. Your Brooklyn Nets have won 7 of the last 8 games. They had a long 7-game homestand where they went 6-1. And look, we talked about, although I tried to limit it on this show, we talked about them a lot when they were struggling and had all the issues with Kyrie. Well, I think it's only fair to acknowledge that it's been schedule aided a little bit, but they've really righted the ship and they've distanced themselves a little bit from this pack of 500-ish teams in the East. So this last stretch for the Nets, what has been working? Why has everything been turned around for them?
Well, they're taking care of business first and foremost, because they're playing weaker opponents. Very clearly, they've played a lot of teams that were playing without a lot of different guys. There was a game in Toronto a week or so ago where the Raptors had like 10 healthy bodies, but those were games earlier in the year that the Nets would have found a way to lose a lot of times, and they're finding ways to win. You can point to the change from Steve Nash to Jacques Vaughn. I think for the most part, the players have really responded well to Jacques. He has gotten them to play better defense. The communication has been outlined several times as being pretty solid, and up and down the organization, they like Jacques' demeanor, but they also like Steve Nash's demeanor when he started. So I think that needs to be pointed out as well. Offensively, I don't think Jacques is doing anything real crazy with the sets there. Kevin Durant is playing at an MVP level. He has been incredible for the first 2 months of the season. Kyrie, when he's been on the floor, has been very good. They've gotten good contributions from Nick Claxton. Ben Simmons seems to have found a rhythm, but then he got hurt again and has been out as he's dealt with knee and calf issues. So for the most part, you give credit when it's due and they're winning. I hesitate because I've watched the ups and downs, and I think a big part of this is they played a lot of home games.
Yeah.
And it's worth noting
They
that
had a 7-game homestand. Was their longest since like the 80s or something? I don't remember.
For years and years. And it's important to note here, and I think it is a key wrinkle. Jacques Vaughn has basically given up on shoot-arounds for the time being. They don't have shoot-arounds. They play the game. They'll have a walkthrough before the game. A couple days later, that's at 4:00 leading into a 7:30 game or so. And the players are just enjoying playing. When the wins are there, you can do that, and it's fun. If they start regressing a little bit, then things might change. But to me, the focus is finally on basketball again. And we've gone through all the Kyrie drama and the Simmons stuff before that, and he was really not playing well. But the focus is on the game, and that has been really crucial in why they've gotten on the run they're on. And go back to Saturday night in Indy, they were punting that one. They rested everybody, and they found a way to win that game. And you walked in that locker room and you started to see everybody looking at each other going, okay, the vibes that had been so bad over those last few weeks with all that was going on off the floor are very good at the moment because they're winning and the team's having fun.
Yeah. I didn't get to see any of that Indiana game. So I looked at the box score. Indiana had their longest road trip in 35 years, which was a good road trip. It ended with them. Well, I think they played in Portland, but they had a great win in Golden State on that trip. Mm-hmm. And it was their first game back from the trip. And one of the things that you see in the NBA is the first game back from a long trip, the teams tend to play a little bit off. But the Nets, Durant sat his first game of the year, right?
Yeah.
Simmons sat, Kyrie sat. You're right. They sacrificed the game and they still won it against a Pacer team. I mean, again, you can't take your hat off to the Pacers for all those wins on the West Coast and then say, they were off. I mean, you have to appropriately give credit to the Nets for winning the game. And watching their defense this year has been like looking at a map of the Alps, because it goes, they're 30th. And then for like a week, they went to first. And then they went back down to like 23rd. So I went and looked, and during this 8-game win streak, I don't know what it'll be by tonight because we got games going on, but coming into tonight's games in this last 8-game stretch, they were 12th in defense, which actually that sounds a little bit more sustainable than being first.
Yeah.
And 11th in offense. Typically you think this is a dominating offensive team. If they had been like first in offense and like fourth in defense, I'd have said, well, I don't know about that, but those aren't stunning numbers. Now, Durant has been unconscious. He's been
incredible.
I don't know if, I don't have a catalog memory of his shooting. And I know that, he had a couple of stretches when he was with the Thunder, when he won all those scoring titles. I mean, there were times I just never thought he would ever miss. So, but in this 8-game stretch, I think he's shooting 63% from the field. I mean, 63%. So there is some hot in there, but like, I don't think they're going to be a top 10 defense on the season, but you tell me they play a 12th defense. Like, I don't know. I mean, do you think the way they're defending recently is something that they can sustain? Because I think that's a huge factor for them.
I think it's solid, but I have questions if they can maintain it, because too often when you watch the Nets, and you saw it a lot during that run of home games where they were playing inferior opponents, aside from like the Raptors when they finally were healthy, the Celtics game comes to mind.
Well,
What
Celtics
happened?
beat them. That was one thing that
Celtics beat them. That was the loss. What happens is this team gets out to a nice start. They allow the team to kind of come back in the second quarter when KD gets his break. The third quarter, they push out a little bit, but they're never able to just run away with the game. And too often, I think through the year, that may be an Achilles heel for the group. But again, they're finding ways to close at the end, and they're making big shots. Usually it's Kevin. Kyrie has had his moments. But this is the push and pull in my own brain. In fact, my mom, who has now been watching all these Nets games every night to see what's going on in my world, she was calling me today and she's going, hey, give them more credit. They're playing really well. And the issue I have, B, is this team was built to win a title. So
That's true.
You're viewing it through the prism of, at least I am. I'm viewing this.
No, you're right. There's a curve that was established after, their first 10, 15 games. I agree.
Right. And so that's the issue I'm having. It's not that you can't give them credit and say that things are coming together nicely. And if Kevin Durant plays like the MVP, as he has for these first 2 months, and he can stay healthy, well, then anything appears to still be possible. But this team was built to win a championship. And I don't believe on either side of the ball, when you're watching the way they're playing, that the consistency will get high enough that you really believe that can happen this year.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is important to realize as we look back at the Kyrie situation, and he's played well, right? I mean, I think I looked up during this win streak, or they're not all wins, but during this 9-game run, he's averaging 27 or 25 and change, or 26 and change, shooting 50%, playing well. I know he's had some games where he's been better than others, but he's been playing. He's been playing, not causing drama on the court, not causing drama off the court. And this is the thing. When he got suspended, no matter what you want to talk about with that suspension, whatever side you want to come down on, whatever, have your opinion, I don't care. He did recognize that he had gone into the red, right?
Yeah.
He had gotten to a point of where it was now a question of what happens if the Nets do something like send him home for a while, or what happens if, what sort of, damage is he doing beyond just his, normal day to day. And I think, at least for the time being, from my perspective outside, and I will never try to read what's going on in Kyrie's mind. He did what he had to do, whatever the checklist morphed into or whatever. He did what he had to do to come back to the team. He said what he had to say. I know that it was parsed like crazy. He said what he had to say. He had written statements and then press conferences where he said what he had to say to get back, and then he's come back. And I know that that night Jacques Vaughn was, maybe it was KD too. We're like, okay, let's focus on basketball now. And I was like, people have been trying to tell him that for 4 years, but I didn't necessarily believe it. I don't necessarily believe it now, but I kind of think that he did maybe sniff that his situation was a little bit more fragile than maybe he thought. And I think for the moment, he may be operating on an understanding that he needs to take care of himself for next year as well right now. Do you think that I'm off base on that at all?
No, I think you're absolutely on point. and I will give you some contextual evidence that pushes that argument along. Kyrie in the last couple of weeks in these post-game news conferences, we'll ask him questions. And we saw this. He had an interview with Megan Triplett of the Yes Network after a game recently. And Megan is just asking Kyrie the normal questions you'd ask on the floor after a game. He played really well. They won. And Kyrie's giving like 2-word answers. And whoever got through to him in the aftermath of everything that had gone on with the suspension, with how poorly those first couple press conferences had gone, somebody got through and said, hey, you're walking on a very, very fine line here. Just don't say much of anything. Don't engage if you don't want to. And right now, for the most part, I mean, he's had some interesting answers in the last couple of weeks, a handful, but usually, and B, you covered him longer than I have. Kyrie likes to talk. Kyrie likes to give his thoughts on what's going on a variety of different topics. And he is not delving into that at the moment. And to me, that's one of the most interesting changes from pre-suspension and controversy to now, because it seems very clear that somebody said, hey, you're getting yourself into too much trouble here, and you've got to pull back. And that's one of the ways
people have been saying that for years.
Right, but it's the message finally got through.
For now.
Aftermath of what's going on for now.
And the thing is, he's playing well, but he was playing well before.
Yeah.
He's played, I mean, probably defensively, maybe not. He's never been great defensively, but he's playing well. Jackson, our producer, by the way, looked up Katie's numbers. I was saying, he shot 63% or whatever in the last 8 games. For the season, he's at 56%. And his highest in his career was 54 through 35 games a couple years ago in Brooklyn. So they're both playing really well. And I think, like, if you're a Nets fan, if you're Sean Marks and you recognize, there's still some issues with the team there, they still have trouble with size.
It's like Nick Claxton or Daron Sharp, to his credit, had a nice game against the Pacers, but doesn't seem like he's pushing into the rotation right now. So Nick Claxton, so you use Simmons at center, or good luck at the moment.
Right. So they still have some flaws they may have to address at some point. And I have no idea whether Kyrie will continue to operate. But, a year ago, Nick, in about this time, we had some personnel changes. Malika Andrews left New York and moved to Los Angeles to cover or to host NBA Today. You were in the process of being moved from San Francisco to New York, and then the Warriors went to the finals, huh? Bontemps left New York, or left Boston, and they went to the finals. I don't know what to say about you two. But anyway, you were in the process of moving to New York to cover the Nets, which I'm sure they're still excited about that.
Oh, yeah.
You arrived.
But a year ago right now, we were in this time where people had forgotten about Kyrie and his vaccination thing. He was just not with the team. And I was pitching in covering Nets games. Olam Youngmisuk flew out from LA and covered a bunch of Nets games, but I would go to these Nets, typically they're road games. And I went to a number of them, and they were just handling their business at that time. Durant was playing really well. Harden wasn't great. We know that he wasn't great last year, but he was getting it done. You know, Cam Thomas, who actually had a big game in Indiana, he was like this sort of interesting rookie who was having these big games that Durant was taking under his wing. They were in first place, Nick. This is one thing about last year. Like, you can debate whether or not they would have continued in that stretch if Kyrie hadn't come back. But before Kyrie came back and they had that wacky home road stuff and everything sort of just threw them off from there, they were handling their business. I feel like right now they're handling their business. And by the way, we got to January. Well, and then, there was an injury to Harden and Durant. That was obviously a factor. Don't get me wrong, but it was sideways
before. Once Kyrie came back, first off, as soon as Kyrie came back, COVID ripped through the team. Not that that was related, but like, you remember he came back and he was immediately in health and safety.
Yeah, and then he was in the protocols. Yeah.
I mean, they had some things happen. I don't want to say it was in a vacuum, but I remember thinking, being with them, they're doing fine. And remember early in the season, they like had stopped calling Harden's fouls. Like right now, the NBA is calling a bunch of travels and carries. Well, if you remember at the beginning of last season, they decided they weren't going to go for some of the trickeration moves that Harden and some other players did, but typically Harden. And all of a sudden, Harden's free throws plummeted and he was complaining. Other guys are complaining. Well, by like this time last season, by like mid-December, Harden's free throws were back up. Like everything was going fine. So I feel like 12 months later, like the Nets are in the same position. They're farther back in the standings this year because of their earlier season drama this year. But to me, the question is, can they keep it up? So let me ask you this. You mentioned Simmons. Simmons has been in and out, in and out, in and out. He's obviously got a knee issue that is bothering him. There's still concern about his back because he's still less than a year off major back surgery.
And we should note here, B, that he thinks they're connected. He thinks the back surgery is connected to the knee soreness, which is connected to now the new calf injury in the last couple weeks here.
So, and Simmons has had some moments where he's looked really good.
Mm-hmm.
So now we talked about Kyrie and Durant. Give me your assessment of what you think you're seeing from Simmons and where you think that's going.
Simmons was really bad for the first month, really bad. Struggled to a point where you were wondering if they could keep playing him anywhere close to the minutes he was playing. When you go back and look at turning points in the Nets season, and certainly in the short term, they played a back-to-back in LA. They played the Clippers and the Lakers. Simmons was bad against the Clippers, didn't play against the Lakers. He gets to Sacramento, he plays well. He gets to Portland, he plays better. He comes home, there's a stretch where he's on the floor, and he started to look like the player that we had seen in Philadelphia. Now he's hurt again, and he said he's feeling better, but it feels like the type of situation where it's just going to be week to week, day to day. But when he has been out there in the last 3 weeks or so, he's been pretty good. And if they can keep him on the floor playing at this level, then they have a pretty good shot to win most nights, especially with the way Kevin and Kyrie are playing. But I'll throw another question back to you that I have bounced around in my own head as we get closer to the trade deadline in a couple months. What would it take if you're Joe Tsai and Sean Marks to say, you know what, this team, it doesn't have enough, and we should explore the trade possibilities specifically with Kevin and Kyrie? Do you think that happens at all between now and the deadline in February?
It's a huge unknown. It's just a big unknown. There was a point at this season where it was trending like, man, and I talked about how, the Nets had to consider at least, put on their, maybe not their main whiteboard, but the whiteboard over on the side of the room, a plan about, well, if there's a year where we're in good shape on our pick swap with Houston, it's this year, because the Rockets are going to be almost guaranteed to have a top 5 pick. So, and Durant has great value still, and other players in the roster have value. Like, that sort of nuclear option button was sitting there. And, I'm sure if Sean Marks were here right now, he would, no, hell no, absolutely not. But of course they had to at least consider it. So the question is, that plan's still sitting over there. Now, they're doing well right now. They're handling their business. I don't know what it would take. I don't know if it would be losing 9 of 10 or something and sliding to 7th place. And you're like, what are we doing? What I do know is the amount that is invested in this roster, not only the money, which is huge. It's like 200 and I don't even remember off the top of my head. It's 200 some odd million. It's like around 250 million when you include the luxury tax, a quarter billion basically. So obviously it's a huge investment, but it is the fruit of the rebuild that they had that is, that when Sean Marks took over, like this is what that rebuild has spawned. It is the fruit of their all-in trade for Harden, their attempt to salvage the all-in trade of Harden, their maneuvers that they went through last summer to sort of fend off the Durant trade request and to sort of maneuver with Kyrie's uncertainty. Like they've got a huge amount of equity in making this work. And I'm sure they would admit that they've done a lot of it holding their nose, going, this is awful, but we are going to try like heck to hold this together. That's what they have done repeatedly. It has not been fun, but they have done what they've had to hold it together, including jettisoning Steve Nash. They didn't want to fire their coach, whatever it was, 3 weeks into the season. But, they had to stand up and say, we're not firing him to Kevin Durant. You don't then want to fire him right after that. That was another move where they're just trying like crazy to hold the thing together. They're going to get Ime Udoka. I mean, that move, it's a kind of a desperate move. It's, on one hand, you're looking.
It's a very desperate move for a guy who's on a suspension for a year.
Right. And then they back down because of whatever. But like the whole concept of doing that, blowing up your coach 3 games in and going and get another coach off suspension, which, let's be honest, like they were pretty close to doing it.
Oh, there were people in the organization thought it was done.
Well, exactly. So I'm saying like you have all of those evidence. We say on this pod all the time, actions over words. And that's especially true for the Nets, especially true for the Nets. Their actions repeatedly have said they're going to do everything they possibly can to hold this together. So I'll say they're going to do everything they can to hold this together. And it may bite them in the end, or they may limp into the playoffs and be dangerous. I can't sit here and look them in the eye and say, oh, look at the Celtics and the Bucks. I think you got a great chance of beating both, because chances are a team like in the Nets position would have to beat both. But look, 1,000 different things could happen to those two teams between now and then. So you're right. This is not a team that's built to try to, stitch its way together, to limp in and try to figure out a way to scratch their way through. But Nick, this is just for me from not being with the team every day. With the team every day, I don't know if you have a different opinion on that.
I thought a few weeks ago that everything was pointing towards, all right, at the trade deadline, all options have to be on the table. With the way they played recently, with the way Kevin has played specifically, and how incredible he's been, it feels like more and more, for the reasons you just noted, B, that they're going to just try to get through this year, get into the playoffs, see what happens. You and I both know that there is no team in the world that wants to see a Nets team with a healthy Kevin Durant in a 7-game series. The Celtics laid the blueprint last year in how they defended him, but Kevin Durant is still Kevin Durant. You don't want to mess with him. I'll throw another point of the conversation, though, in here, and this factors in not just what's happening in the present, but what happens in the future. Before a game last week, I emailed our friend Bobby Marks, and I said, Bobby, to walk me through this Nets salary cap situation moving forward into the summer, assuming Kyrie comes off the books, and as we sit here right now, and you said you never try to get into Kyrie's head, I'm never going to try to figure out the relationship at this point between Kyrie and the Nets, because it has gone so many different ways in the last few years. But
I wouldn't call it good. I'll never call it.
I think that's a safe way to go at it. But I would think that once this $36.5 million option runs its course, that's probably the end of Kyrie's time in Brooklyn. So my point to Bobby and the question was, if you let Kyrie walk and you say to Kevin, hey, we love you, you've done everything we could have asked, we still want to build around you and your future, and he'll be 35 going into next year. What are their options then? And he said, well, you're out of the luxury tax, so Josiah will be happy about that. But with the way everything is set up and with Simmons' deal on the books, you only have the $11 million mid-level, and that's it. There is not a major way in which to improve this team on paper unless you're making some kind of major deal. And that is why, one, I think they're just going to let this season play out, hope for the best, keep winning games, see what happens.
I mean,
but
I would not rule out, not that because I think it's going to happen, but just because I've seen too much. I wouldn't completely rule out Kyrie coming back. Would I bet on it? No. But I could see both of them not having a better option. Your face. Your face.
Although, look, I say this as somebody not only who's lived the last 6 weeks of time. I said many times, you and I were going on all those different shows. And the question would always be posed to us: did you think that Kevin and Kyrie would start next season with the Nets? And knowing all the things that I knew at that point, I was going, there's no way. Everybody understood. Everybody in that organization understood the distractions, multiple, that Kyrie caused on and off the floor. And the idea that everybody was just going to have this happy reunion and Kevin was going to come back and everything was going to be great. I didn't think there was a very good chance. But if I have learned anything with the Brooklyn Nets, it's that just when you think things are going one way, they can go the opposite in good and bad direction. So I'm with you. I don't think you rule it out at all. I'm just laying out the different options of what could happen moving forward past whatever may happen this year. But when you realize that there just doesn't seem to be a lot of options as far as improving this team in the future, and they don't have a lot of picks because they went all in on that Harden trade and tried to save a few from Philly and getting Simmons. You're looking at a future, if Kyrie does go elsewhere, with KD at 35, Ben Simmons dealing with the injury concerns he's dealing with, and a lot of other question marks on a roster that, again, is solid, but was built to win it all.
So let me ask you this, and I agree. Like I sitting here in December, I don't think that's going to happen, but I would not rule it out. What if they pivot the other way? What are the realistic things that they can do to improve this roster? They're going to have to get another center at some point if they're serious about this, because, you know, just the reality that they may need somebody to lean up against Joel Embiid in the postseason. They do have the Sixers pick that they traded for last year that they're going to get this year. And they have the distant Sixers pick that they got. The control of their own draft is, basically controlled by Houston. But they do have a little bit of maneuverability, and they have some guys on their roster. Like, I don't think Joe Harris I wouldn't think he'd be looked at as a coveted contract, but there are people who would want him. What about a trade to improve? I don't know who it would be, but the opposite of what the nuclear option would be.
Yeah, you would think it would have to be a big man. That the name that keeps popping up, that seemingly always pops up for any team that's looking for a big man, is Miles Turner. If you're the Pacers, what do you see from the Nets that would make you go, okay, yeah, let's start talking?
Here's the thing about the Pacers.
But that's the issue Sean Mark's going to have. Yeah, right.
The Pacers are winning now. Like, I don't know where the Pacers will be in February, but they're winning now. I think people, and I know, just because everybody knows that Hield and Turner were available, and Turner has talked about what he wanted to get paid, and he's basically asked the Lakers to trade for him in that one podcast interview, which was amazing. But it's working for Indy. The bad loss to the Nets at home notwithstanding, like, I doubt decisions have been made, but I would say you'd start to have to slide Indiana over to the neutral category, if not toward looking at being a buyer. Andrew Nemhart, their rookie guard, has been so good, and they're going to get Chris Duarte, their number one pick from last year, back soon. They actually may have a little bit of a surplus at guard, and they do have good draft capital. I don't think anybody should assume the Pacers are going to be sellers. I don't think you should assume they're going to be buyers yet, but I would slide that sucker back over to neutral right now. So yeah, that would be amazing for the Nets. But the other thing is, let's say the Pacers do end up deciding to sell and Turner does truly become available. I know that he's been sort of on and off the market for a couple of years now, but there would be other bidders probably, and not maybe
other bidders with more assets to provide.
Sure.
That's what Brooklyn runs into, because you and I could go through every different option out there for them. We agree they need another big man. What big man are you bringing in that is readily available to them that's going to make that big of a difference? And
Right. Yeah,
that's the problem. And it's not just for Brooklyn, that's a lot of teams. But when you are stretched out financially and you are stretched out organizationally and what you have to offer different teams, this is the situation that you find yourself in.
Durant is playing a lot of minutes. I have talked about how this is, they can't help themselves. He's playing so well. He never looks like he gets tired. But he's averaging 37 minutes a game. By the way, he averaged 37 minutes last year. It's not like they kicked up his minutes, but he's, 34, whatever he is, 35. 34. Are you, is that something look, what are you supposed to have a crystal ball, but is that something that they obviously have some concern over that? Otherwise they wouldn't have sat him down against the Pacers.
Yeah. Hell yeah. You got to be concerned. And I say that as a Tom Thibodeau disciple of the minutes police watched back in Chicago. I mean,
Tibbs is your mentor, the way Silas.
I didn't want to get in the middle of your Silas stories, because I enjoyed listening to him and I appreciate it. But that is 100% what it was. That's all I kept thinking as you were talking about what Silas did for you. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that Vinny Del Negro, when I first started covering the Bulls for that year or so, he treated me with respect and as a professional, which I appreciated. But I learned basketball through watching those Tibbs teams day after day, year after year. And I say that in the context of our conversation now, because if the question is, are you concerned about minutes, especially on a guy who has played so many over 16 years and is so crucially important to the success of this team? Absolutely. And you can tell in the way Jack Vaughn is talking after games that he's very, very concerned. But I have to go on a very quick tangent in the context of Kevin Durant's minutes. I'm sitting in Gainbridge Fieldhouse in Indianapolis. These Pacers fans are walking into the building realizing that Kevin Durant's not playing, Kyrie Irving's not playing, Ben Simmons not playing. They've got 8 guys out, basically their whole rotation. The intensity in that game and in that building, was that of a midweek game at the Vegas Summer League. Those two teams were just running up and down the floor. No defense. Defense wasn't.
Yeah, it was like 140 to 138 was the final score.
Just running up and down. And at the end, when the Pacers realized they were going to lose, their fans were kind of stunned. But that was a case study, that game, on why, as somebody who covers the game, loves the game, there are too many regular season games. Rick Carlisle asked him about it before the game. And he said, hey, we had problems with Bradley Beal, the Washington Wizards the night before. You know that the younger players are going to bring it. I'm not talking about that. The Nets deserve all the credit for how they approach the game, and they won. Fans pay to see the stars. And if you can't, as a league, as a product, allow your stars the ability to perform, then you're going to run into the issues optics-wise of people saying that the NBA regular season does not matter. And as I sat there as a journalist watching and covering that game, that's the same thought that kept going through my mind. Why, as a league, is the NBA saying, oh, you got to watch this Nets Pacers game where you've got 8 guys sitting out? And I don't blame the Nets at all. I don't blame them at all for what they did. It's well within the rules. Teams do it all the time, even though they did it with more guys at once. They didn't do anything wrong, and they won. I'm looking at this, though, as a fan of the game. I'm wearing my Horace Grant goggles to the Magic game, in 95, and I'm thinking, there are kids, and I heard some of the stories when we were sitting there. There were kids that paid to watch Kevin Durant. Their parents paid. They planned that whole weekend, that night, on coming to see Kevin Durant play. And I know how much that means to him, and I know how much it means to Kyrie. I've talked to them
Also,
both.
it's really expensive. It's really, really expensive.
Really expensive, and the league has a serious problem here. Because
counterpoint.
Okay, hit me.
Tonight in New Orleans, Suns played the Pelicans. Second time in 3 days. Brandon Ingram is out. He's missed 8 games in a row. Devin Booker hurt his hamstring, which is the 3rd time in the last year, by the way, Booker has hurt his hamstring. And I'm not saying that it wasn't sore before this happened, but unless I'm wrong, because the last 2 times I was actually at the game, he's hurt his hamstring trying to chase down a transition basket in defense, where there was been a turnover or a long rebound, and he's booked it. He's like hit the afterburner to try to get back on defense. And he's tweaked his hamstring now 3 times doing the exact same thing. And again, for all I know, it was already sore and that aggravates it. But I would say to Devin Booker going forward, unless it is the playoffs elimination game or a finals game, when a player gets behind you, just let him score.
Let him go.
I don't even care if it's the game-winning basket. Let him score. Having said that, whatever, Booker is out. That was a very highly contested game. Now, Zion did play. Chris Paul did play. Very highly contested game. Went to overtime. Chris Paul hit a shot with like 4 seconds left or something to force overtime. Excellent high-level basketball. So you can have great games no matter what. And I would say that in general, the play in the NBA is very high. But of course, the league is marketed around stars. And when the schedule comes out, if you're a Kevin Durant fan in Indianapolis, which you know that there are, they say, when are the Nets coming in? Oh my gosh, a Saturday night game? Yep. Sound after football season, basically after college football season, sounds great. And it wasn't a back-to-back, right? So
no, it was a back-to-back.
It was a back-to-back. Wow,
it was a back-to-back. I thought they played
Thursday. Well, yeah, well. Yeah, it's start of a 4-game trip. So we'll see what the Nets have a 4-game trip. And then they come back for the Bucks and Celtics. And then I think they play the Cavs the day after Christmas. So these last 8 games, now, they did get the Trailblazers in there without Dame Lillard, but they beat the Raptors at home after Siakam and Scotty Barnes had come back. They beat the Wizards at home after Beal had come back. I mean, it wasn't a pure, simple situation, but their schedule is, so they have a 4-game road trip now. The first game was in Indy. Second game is where you are tonight or tomorrow in DC tonight when this pod comes out. And then they go Toronto and where else?
They go Toronto.
You don't even know. It's your road trip. You don't even know where they're going.
It's that point in the year. I do know that they're going to have like 2 practice days, which they haven't had in between.
By the way, you were just in Toronto like 10 days ago. This keeps happening this year. You were just in Toronto.
Well, and I was just in Indy. That's why my head is just spinning with this team and with this season.
Right, and they just played the Celtics at home, and they play them at home again in like 10 days. The schedule is like that. There's all these things packed in. The Pelicans and the Suns have played each other 3 times already. The Pelicans are up 2-1, and they play each other again next weekend, and that's it. That's a budding rivalry in the NBA, and they're done before Christmas of 4 games.
Well, that's like the Nets just finished their 4 games with the Pacers because they played one of those weird home and home or
baseball
home baseball series. And Jackson, as Jackson points out here, Detroit is after Toronto.
How dare you forget about Detroit?
I mean,
Just think about the pizza.
oh man, this team. It out of all the years that the Nets have also taught me this, B, as I'm struggling to remember where I'm going in the next week. I used to tell people, oh man, it can't get crazier than following the Derek injury and the aftermath in Chicago. It can't get crazier than the Gar and Pax Tibbs drama and the breakup of that team that everybody thought was going to at least get to the finals and potentially win a title. It can't get crazier than the last KD year in Oakland with the Warriors when that breakup was going down that whole season. The Nets have taught me that I've got to just stop saying that because it can't get crazier than what has happened with this team, not just in the last month and a half, since my plane landed and I switched from the Warriors to the Nets. I have never, ever been around a basketball team, any team, that has had this many storylines and this much drama on a day-to-day basis. And as we come full circle from the beginning of our conversation tonight, what's so important here is that the Nets got worn out by all of that, and they've just been playing games and they've been winning, and the focus is back on the floor. And if Kevin and Kyrie and Jacques Vaughn, they can keep that focus there, then this team has a chance to grow and continue to succeed. But when the focus goes off the rails, as we've seen it for a variety of reasons, usually centered around something that has gone on with Kyrie, that's when the product and the team itself really hits big problems.
Well, until we talk again, who knows what's going to happen between now and then. Nick Friedell, thank you for joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you for listening to the Hoop Collective podcast. Thank you to Jackson, our producer. I'm headed out to L.A. tomorrow. I am going to games the next 4 days in L.A., Nick. A couple of Celtics games, Wolves and Suns. So 4 games in a row in LA. So I am starting to feel like Bontemps with that kind of schedule.
Oh God.
We'll talk to you from LA on Wednesday. Thanks for listening.